Okay. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the January 2022 meeting of the Sustainable Environmental Advisory Commission. Due to the surge in COVID-19 cases, this meeting is being held virtually. Members of the public who wish to comment as an item on the published agenda must submit their statement or questions in writing to elizabeth.zimmerman@skokie.org, and all properly submitted statements or questions will be presented to commission members and made part of the record. Written statements may also be submitted by email to citizencomments@skokie.org or by mail to Village of Skokie. Attention, Elizabeth Zimmerman, 5127 Oakton Street, Skokie, Illinois 60077, or via the Village's Dropbox located by the public entry. And this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. Okay. The first item on our agenda is an approval of the minutes from last month, or actually it was November's meeting. We did not meet in December. And you all should have received those minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Anyone?
I'll motion it.
A second.
Okay, were there any corrections, changes, anything that? No, okay, all those in favor? Eyes or hands? Okay. Motion passes. Okay, next on our agenda is our old business. The first up is the final greenhouse gas inventory report.
Yeah, so we all saw the presentation at the November meeting. Delta did follow up and they were able to get some better NICOR gas data, which actually proved to our advantage. They were surprised Skokie was doing a little bit better on that, those I think phase one, the scope 1 emissions and what they had initially thought. So he did rerun those numbers. You should have all received that report. All of us, at the Village have already been kind of reviewing how to move forward with the greenhouse gas inventory. We've been incorporating some of those recommendations into the budget for recommendations. And we will also provide a copy of that report we're going to be talking about this further down on the agenda. We'll be going out for an RFP for the sustainability plan, and we're certainly going to incorporate those strategies from the greenhouse gas inventory into that plan. And so that's kind of where we're at with that report. Did anybody have any questions on that?
So, I mean, I think you just answered my question. One of the things that I felt while I was reading that report was that it doesn't, and I can understand where this comes from, but there's not a huge commitment from the Village, there's not a lot of like actionable items that the Village is committing to, but I think that that's likely going to come from the sustainability plan, right? That's sort of the next step. Then is to incorporate it into a Village plan for actionable items.
Right. There were strategies outlined on the report. And so, we're definitely looking at those. Some of those, like I said, are further on the agenda. The Village operations wasn't a huge portion of the pie, honestly. We're just like kind of a sliver of the Village. And so that's where we're going to be looking to the sustainability report, I think, to provide us with some recommendations on more on the Village-wide aspect. Sure. And Max is going to.
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. If I could just add in a comment to that as well. We have an executive staff meeting with department directors once a month, and I presented the results of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory to the Village's executive staff at our most recent staff meeting. So it was an overview of the same information that you've seen. So we did talk about some of the preliminary strategies that Delta has developed and talked about mostly the Village operational components, but we did talk as well about some of the initial community strategies that Delta had contemplated. And so that was intended as an overview for the rest of the village departments to start thinking about what their likely roles may be in this, and for them to start thinking about what some of their strategic responses to that might be. So we've started turning those wheels as well. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that.
Sorry, I missed this meeting, but so was there any discussion about reducing the garbage pickups to once a week as also a way to reduce emissions?
Yeah, we're going to be, that's the challenge, I think, of the agenda today, Bob, is further down, I'm going to be giving the results for the recycling and refuse. And that's the study that we did kind of on the street, like what's happening in our own community. And then also the status of the waste committee further on the agenda. The subcommittee worked really hard to produce to the results from the listening session. And so we're definitely going to get into some of that a little further down. Any other questions?
Liz, this is Jim. Not so much a question on the report, but just a question curious for the future. Is this something that'll be updated on an ongoing basis, like on an annual basis, or maybe every other year? Just curious.
Yeah, I don't think they're really done on that frequency. We've seen them done about once every 5 years. Delta did mention every kind of like 3 to 5 years. So yeah, absolutely. I think it will be something that we check in on, on some sort of recommended, basis to see how we're doing. All right, so the next item on the agenda, the endorsement of the climate action plan for the region. We're definitely, we at the November meeting, for those of you that weren't there, the group did vote to go ahead and support the regional plan. One of the, I think, reasons we were just waiting a little bit, we wanted to kind of see our own data come in, make sure that it matched those regional goals, which it did. I mean, a lot of these greenhouse gas reports and climate action plans are obviously very similar. So we feel very confident in supporting this plan. And we will be moving forward. There was just we've had some challenges getting on the board meeting with, the village manager had been out for a few weeks and so forth, but it's definitely just on our radar, and we're going to be moving forward with that. Okay, so I'll just move right into the recycling and refuse data.
Just to back up a little bit, Liz, when do we anticipate the climate plan resolution to be on the presented to the board, taken up by the board?
Yeah, we don't have a date yet, Charlie.
Okay.
John just came back, and we've been pretty heavy into budget, and as you'll see, the results on the PowerPoint have taken up quite a bit of time, and so it's honestly just been a matter of fitting it in. I would anticipate in the next, 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah. There we go. So I know some of you attended the capstone recycling study. They were a really great group to work with. The students were great. The one thing I will say about the process, just they were grad students, they had full-time jobs. It was done in a semester. We didn't have a lot of opportunity to go back and forth where we would look at the data, kind of see if it made sense, how it was being analyzed, and then maybe run through the data one more time. And so once I saw the presentation, I just wanted to see the data differently. I wanted to see, maybe rather than some of that statistical analysis, I wanted to see some of the raw data. I found some problems where there were, some addresses in there where we had missed a collection, and we had wrote, for example, not applicable, that were counted as 0. And so I spent quite a bit of time going back over the data again. And so, we're going to see just a different way to look at the data. And some of the data is going to be a little different than what we saw that first time. And that is just because we found some errors in the analysis. All right, so I just wanted to give, this is gonna be a little challenging. I think what I'm gonna do is when I finish the recycling portion, I'll go ahead and put your videos back up in case you have any questions, but just for right now, so everybody can see it, I'm gonna minimize. No, that won't work. All right, try that. Okay, so just a recap on Skokie's recycling program. I know you all live in town and you're aware, but we have weekly collection. We've got 65-gallon toters, and even though it's contracted, we do have some staff that kind of monitor when there are issues. So Lakeshore will, make us aware if somebody's kind of using their recycling as a trash can, and we do go out and resolve those matters. Typically, we don't really see too many issues in the single family homes. That's more with like the 2 to 4 flats. But we, none of those scenarios ended up in this study. Every address had a recycling cart. Newer carts that are less than 5 years old have the information for recycling embedded right on the lid of the cart that tells people what is and isn't recyclable. This slide mostly just kind of highlights that about half of the town has their recycling coincide with their first pickup, so a Monday or Tuesday pickup. And I mention that because historically, Max has done some research with some other folks that work for the village, and we have found that there's like a little bit of an uptick in recycling when that coincides with those first 2 days. And so what we were really looking at when we did this study, we had some very direct questions that we wanted answered about our program. We wanted to know how often households are using recycling and if the weekly collection is necessary, if we could go to bi-weekly. We wanted to know how much the households are recycling, how much of their toter are they using. Are we seeing differences between curb and alley collection? Does recycling increase if it occurs during that first refuse pickup? What is our contamination rate? Very basic question that we really didn't know. What types of contamination are occurring? Because we wanted to glean people's recycling habits and trends to better target for our educational campaigns. So this first part is looking at, this is mostly curbside, but we want to take a look at set out rates and toter capacity usage. I just wanted to give a little bit of background on how we did the methodology. These were Lakeshore routes, they weren't village routes. And so I got this map from Lakeshore, and they gave me 3 different ones for the different areas of town. Oh, yep. And so what we were able to do is I could just trace the same boundaries in our village mapping program and then export all of those addresses into an Excel spreadsheet. I numbered all of those addresses, and then we used a website that was essentially a lottery to go ahead and randomly select addresses. We didn't have the staff to do every single area in town. So what we did is we selected Lakeshore routes that included both curb and alley collections. And so we had 2 different data collectors. Each data collector was assigned a route for Monday, Tuesday. We skipped Wednesday, there's no collection, and then Thursday and Friday. And they looked at the same addresses for 2 weeks in a row for 2 collections. We wanted to know if the toter was set out and what capacity of the toter was utilized. And we spent some time looking at the cart and going through some examples to kind of calibrate our eyes so we were all on the same page. And with any sort of field study, we did run into some issues. We did have Indigenous Peoples Day that occurred on the second week of collection. And we do believe that did reduce participation for that day. Initially, I wanted to include the 2 to 4 flats because they were part of village service. When we went out and looked at some of those properties, it was very evident that they behaved in a completely different way than the single family homes. And so we do have some anecdotal data, from those, but we decided to go ahead and pull that data from the study. So what you'll be seeing is just for single family homes. And although we did coordinate with Lakeshore, it's incredibly difficult. The drivers will run their routes a little differently, maybe to avoid if there's like school in session or what have you. And so one of our data collectors got sort of leapfrogged, and we did miss some collection on one day. And then we've got really good data going back from 1995 on what our recycling tonnage is. And so I wanted to just add this in. The study was conducted in October and November. Those months are it's a nice month to collect data. It's right about average. Our peak month is May. That's about 10% higher than average. And there are various reasons for this. We have some snowbirds that leave town. School is out in the summer. So, summer peaks a little bit with usage because there's just more people home. And there's just kind of more parties and fun things to do. Conversely, we see that January and February are the lowest recycling tonnage. And so, just some lessons learned is we also had the refuse study results later in the presentation. We learned right away we need to increase sample size because we're going to experience some field issues, and that we need to separate out that multifamily. So this is an interesting way to look at the data. This essentially is just kind of showing over the course of the 2 weeks, there were a certain number of stops. How many of those stops are not utilized in our program? And it's more than what you would think. So for alley collections, right about 20% of our stops are not even utilized in the course of, over the course of that 2 weeks. And for curb, it's even higher, as you would expect, because people have to make the effort to bring their recycling to the curb. We want to look at this data a little bit because we pay our recycling contract on a per stop basis. But, just because we tell Lakeshore, hey, we're not utilizing this amount of stops, they really can't reduce the price for us because they're still passing those stops, and they still requires the same amount of truck time and labor to kind of roll through town. But the point I want to make here is whether or not people are really interested in sustainability, it's important to think about this, because if people are not recycling, that tonnage is going into our waste stream and we're paying those disposal costs. So just from a budgetary standpoint, this is important data to look at.
Liz, this is Jim. So did you say that you visited each address only once during your 2-week period?
No, so it would be, let's say we did 100 addresses. Those same addresses were visited twice.
Okay, so 0%, that would be 2 occurrences of 0%?
So basically, let's say there were, I think the sample size is on here, but let's just say we did 100 addresses and we looked at that twice, so that would be 200 times. That's what this data is showing. So like 20% of 200 would be how that's showing.
Okay. All right.
It's not necessarily the same 2 households.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get into some of that data a little bit.
Okay.
So this is more, Jim, of what you're getting at. So then we wanted to see kind of more habits. So this would be like the same household here. So number of toters set out in a 2-week period. So 20% of curb houses had 0 toters out over the 2-week period. So 20% of the houses didn't use recycling at all in our collection time. 18% put it out once, and 62% put it out 2 times. we just put the alley data on there because we had it, but alley carts just sit out there. So this slide is really about the curb collection.
Do you know what percentage of Skokie is curb?
You know, it's more than what I thought. Once we did this data, I realized we don't really have great data on that, but it is more than what you would think. There's a whole bunch of areas like around the Devonshire area that don't have alleys. You know, we do have some areas in town that, you know, do have like cul-de-sacs and that type of thing. And also on the south side of town too, we have just quite a bit. There's more than what we thought, or than what I thought. And as you know, I mentioned a few times, we did have some data from another study that we suspected that recycling was higher when it aligned with the first refuse collection. That is true for curb. I think it's just about the effort of bringing that cart out. And this is based on what we're seeing is we're seeing about 7% more recycling per toter if that recycling aligns with that first pickup. Didn't really see a difference in the alley, I would say. And so I know Charlie attended the capstone presentation. This is a more granular way. I think capstone presented something like we're on average using 42% of our toters. That didn't tell us a whole lot. We wanted to look at that data a little bit more. This is concerning. 25% of households not really recycling, barely recycling. But the interesting part of this data is that 61% of households would be okay if we did go to every other week collection. These ones in the yellow would be okay if we upgraded to 95-gallon containers. And about 15% of the population would have an issue if we did go down to weekly collection. But I just wanted to note that kind of these last two groups here, about 8% of them had notes of heavy contamination. So they had a lot of non-recyclables in their cart. Just going to leave this up for a quick second to let that settle in. Does anybody have any questions on this?
What are the current size of the toters again?
65 gallon.
65.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
These
then,
No, go ahead, Emily.
yeah, I was gonna ask if they're using more than, I mean, it looks like, so you're saying that 15% would need 2 toters. I guess with the ones who are using more than 100%, I'm wondering to what extent like that could be covered by leaving boxes on top or something like that, like a 95-gallon one plus boxes on top.
Yeah, our data collectors, we'll get a little bit more to that data too when we get into what's in the recycling. Our data collectors did try to eyeball, like if somebody didn't break down a box or something, I would tell them, okay, just try to eyeball if that and guess what that would be if that box was broken down. So we did try to account for that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
How do people get 114 gallons of recycling in a 65-gallon container? I'm curious.
Oh, we do have some scenarios where, again, we do have that supervisor that is kind of checking in and recycling. And so if somebody is recycling well and they show a true need, he will drop off a second cart or upgrade to a 95. It's not very common though.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I would say mostly what was happening when we looked at the data is they would have a big pile of cardboard or a box of cardboard filled with cardboard or something like that next to their cart. Cardboard's going to be the big one, you'll see.
And so is there a cost difference to the, sorry, Jenny, is there a cost difference to the family? Oh, is this what you're right here?
No, so we currently do not charge for an extra toter for recycling. So that would be something for the subcommittee to consider.
That those numbers in the last slide, the individual households, these are just the households that were selected for the study, and then they were, yes, or these the questions.
So this is looking at this. So what we did is we added together their each household's 2-week capacity.
Okay.
And then that data was brought here. So again, if we just use that simple, like 100.
Oh, you wouldn't ask them these questions. This is just you're extrapolating based on their usage.
No, we're not extrapolating. This is real data.
Right.
So we went out in the
How did-
field.
But I mean, you're not asking them if they would be okay if you moved it every other week, is what I'm saying.
We are not asking them if they would be
So
okay.
it's I'm not extrapolating. It's based on what they use. Your conclusion is yes, they'd be fine if we did every other week because they didn't fill it. But if you actually ask them, they might say, well, I wouldn't be because these 2 weeks I just happen to be low. Right? These aren't survey results. These are just based on what they actually put out.
Yeah, no, this is just data collection. We did not do any type of
Okay.
survey with
Got it. That 61% of households would be okay if recycling was every other week seemed high, but that's not what actually people are telling you. That's just based on what they're actually using.
Yeah,
So
I would
based on a 2-week volume, they could get away with one
Yeah.
collection in a 65-gallon toter is basically what's.
everything in green. Yep, that's
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's based on just this one snapshot of data. So
Right.
Okay, so there would be a savings, obviously, to go down to biweekly collection, but I just wanted to show that there's also a cost to it. The cost is not insignificant. For the example I just showed, if we needed to upgrade 95-gallon recycling carts, that's $51 is the price for 2022. This is the total number of single family. If we needed to do that for 6,830 households, we'd be looking at a capital cost of about $350,000. It's really difficult to deploy that many carts. And so there would be a lot of delivery, administrative costs, and so forth. And then we would also be looking at additional operational costs, assuming a 10-year life cycle. That's very ambitious. But for recycling carts, we do get a little bit more life out of them than the refuse. We're going to be looking at Public Works needing about $45,000 a year to go ahead and repair carts, to drop new carts off, to take phone calls about them, and just kind of do general maintenance.
Is that an additional? Is that additional $45,000 a year?
Yes. Yeah.
Like throughout the next 10 years, or?
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't expect it to be 45,000 like the first year out, or maybe the second year, but we would definitely see that number increase as time went on and those carts got older.
That's above and beyond. That's above and beyond our current costs.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The cart replacement and lid repair is our number one request that we get at Public Works. Sending a truck out and a person and the labor to handle all of those requests and to take those requests on the phone or through our system is, there's a real cost to that for sure.
But we have those costs anyway.
No, this is
this
an
would be extra.
addition to our current costs.
Basically, because you're in.
Yeah, if you put another 6,800 toters out on our street, we're going to be looking at an extra cost of that per year.
Liz, is the 95 gallon, is a 95 gallon, is that the same size as the garbage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not replacing them, you're putting an additional one out so that everybody has 2 recyclings? I'm sorry, I'm confused about.
Yeah, this is.
Okay, so the yellow would need to be upgraded to a 95-gallon toter.
But only one, not 95 plus the 65?
Right, we would take their 65 away and give them a 95.
Okay.
And then, this 15% would need 2 toters.
I think one thing to sort of say is that it's because you're disrupting the cycle. It's because right now you're on a cycle where you sort of have like a certain amount of carts that you have to deal with every year. And then if you were to do this and like sort of infuse all these new carts, then your cycle would be disrupted. Is that right?
Well, it's pretty, that's true. I would say to deploy the 6,800 carts would be,
Right,
those are brand new carts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. The annual maintenance costs eventually would even out, but I would suspect that this would not be terribly off for a few years. Yeah.
Can you sell the old carts?
What's that?
You sell the old carts? You get rid of them and make a profit?
Yeah, I mean, we would probably be able to use some of those 65 gallons. And nobody would be thrilled, I think, to get an old cart. They like nobody likes other people's recycling and garbage juice in their carts, but certainly we could repurpose some of them.
Do you have an
Elizabeth.
idea of what a cost savings would be if you were to go down to once every other week?
Yeah, we've been working on that. We don't have that number yet, Jenny.
Okay.
I was going to ask also, as far as the increased cost, I don't know. And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but seeing as the change would be, there'd be sort of obviously there's this environmental motive, I think, to making these changes. Is there any opportunity for any sort of outside funding, grants, that kind of thing for this kind of thing? I don't know. I'm not familiar, so.
I personally haven't seen anything for this, Andrew. I haven't.
Yeah, because I was wondering if there's some sort of to help offset.
Right. And so, we're talking about a program right now where 20% of people aren't using it. You just saw the breakdown. I just wanted to kind of, mention that there's definitely an environmental advantage to optimizing routes and to matching the right frequency of routes for what we need. Lakeshore was able to provide, some data on how many miles are traveled. I did not get the miles per gallon on their trucks, but we have good data on our refuse trucks. I would suspect the recycling trucks are getting a little bit more just because the loads are a little lighter. And so, we're not taking this data literal, but certainly it's well within the ballpark here. So reducing, service to half, going to a biweekly collection would save roughly, say, 9 to 11,000 gallons of diesel fuel annually. That starts making a dent in our greenhouse gas emissions. That does.
Elizabeth, I have a question on how was the 6830 totes determined? Like, how did I'm not clear on how that number came about.
Sure. So I can go back to the slide. So we were able to determine, kind of a percentage, Alma, that would either need an additional tote or a new toter. And then we know how many households we have in Skokie. So that's an extrapolated number. Again, these are all estimates. And so when we get going with the program, I would anticipate, there's people out there that just aren't used to maybe having to fold up their boxes, as well as maybe what people in Chicago do and those sorts of things. And so I think we're going to have a lot more requests for carts than maybe the true need is. I think the perception is a big hurdle. I do.
Okay. And is the sample size 23 households? Am I reading this correctly?
Yes. So,
okay.
But it's over the course of 2 weeks. And so these are, essentially it's like this times, double for the data points, but then we combine the 2-week capacity, just to see, kind of what would happen here if we went down to biweekly.
Okay. And the $350,000 investment, would that be something that, that's an estimate, obviously, or 352 is, considering the small sample size, would these households that may need extra large tote, would they, how are they selected? Would they need to call in and request it? And so we're estimating that it's 6,800 households, or is this something that they, how are we going to determine that?
Yeah, so we would need some boots on the ground. Again, that would probably be part of this $44,000 as well, $45,000 of, maybe an intern or our supervisor kind of verifying that the need is there for the cart. And it's it is a concern of responding to those.
Okay, so before we would proceed, we would actually have some boots on the ground, invest $40,000 to figure out which households are in need of larger totes. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if you want to wait till the end of the presentation, you're going to see more on the refuse side too. And so I think it's better to look at everything as on the whole at the end for the final recommendations.
Okay, sounds good.
So,
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
so I'm sorry. So, because I think maybe I have a related question, because did they look in the refuse cart to see how full the refuse cart was?
Yeah. So, well, it's a little bit different. We weren't able to use the exact same houses because the routes are run so differently, Bob. So you would, yeah. So there's a very small window in the morning that we have to check the carts because a lot of people won't bring their refuse or recycling out until last minute. And because the refuse routes are run so differently than recycling, we might have been going past carts that were tipped, refuse carts. And so we ran the same data with refuse, but we weren't able to incorporate all of the same houses.
Right. I mean, it was theoretically over time, you would hope that you would reduce the size of the refuse cart and increase the size of the recycling cart because people were recycling more. That would seem to be like a logical possibility. And so,
yeah.
So I was interested if there was any data to support that.
Yes. So at the end, we were able to make some correlations between the two. So again, this slide just kind of shows, and again, the numbers, each truck is a little different, routes are different, and so forth, but there is definitely an emissions benefit to optimizing routes. And this just kind of supports that. I was able to plug that amount of diesel into the EPA calculator, and it kind of just spits out all the different environmental equivalents here. The bottom graph is or table is pulled from the greenhouse, our Skokie greenhouse gas emissions, and so I would have to talk to Delta to see exactly how this is calculated. But what we just showed you is roughly about 6% of our transportation emissions. All right, so the contamination portion of this study. I thought this was interesting. We've debated this, here with SEAC of, how much contamination can Lakeshore really tolerate with, before they don't even want it. And I know that sometimes there's this myth out there that if you contaminate, your recycling with one item or two items that they just don't even want it. We're really fortunate. Lakeshore has a really wonderful facility. And so they can get up to about 50% contamination. After that, they really don't want to see it. We found that certain types of contamination are much worse than others. So this is an important marketing point here. Plastic bags are really bad. They clog up the equipment. And also what we're finding is that people that spent the time to learn how to recycle and to rinse their recycling will stick it in their jewel bags and tie it. And that does often get thrown out because they just can't process it, or they don't have enough people to process that by hand or rip those bags open. So that's some very important messaging that we really need to hit hard on in Skokie. We wanted to look for trends of contamination, what the households are recycling, and at the end, to Bob's point, there's going to be some information that correlates refuse and recycling habits. So we were a little ambitious. We were hoping to get 100 samples for this. This work turned out to be much more difficult. It kind of turned out to be a two-person job. Tipping loose recycling into a bag on a windy day, it just was harder than what we thought. So we only got 60 samples. Lakeshore had some really great resources of people that have done studies like this. They said, don't worry, you're going to see trends with that amount of samples. That's okay. But we can't extrapolate that data and make, it's just more qualitative. I don't want to, the sample size just isn't there. So this is kind of how we did it. Jenny was there. We took one of our toters, we filled it with water to kind of see every 10 gallons of capacity on the side so we could get better volume estimates than what we were doing in the field. We weighed each household's recycling. There was our wash bay right there with a lot of the samples. And then we went ahead and divided it out into all these different categories. So it was a labor-intensive process, and each one was sorted into landfill, paper, cardboard, cartons, metals, glass, and plastics. And that was what Lakeshore suggested that we do. For those of you that did attend that capstone study, I just wanted, to kind of show up one of theirs. We were able to determine with the weights that we do have about 22% contamination. This is something that we never knew about our system before. I did reach out to Swank, and they also don't have really good data for what contamination is in the recycling. But their guess was right about 20%. So we're right there with, what we think is average. All right. Okay, so one of our theories was that we were going to see more contamination in the alley because the junkers would go by and throw trash in it, or neighbors would fly dump, or what have you. We really didn't see that. You can kind of see these two green bars are pretty even, for the different categories. Again, small sample size, but we just didn't see it in the field. I do want to mention that for the contamination study, 20%, just to keep in mind, 25% of households weren't even recycling in the first place. So this really is only a snapshot of those houses that are recycling. And the households that are really contaminating are definitely pulling our numbers up. They're definitely a bad apple that's spoiling the bunch. Oh, but I do want to mention the positive news here. 65 to 70% of people that are recycling are doing a very good job at it. All right, so curb versus alley, not a factor in our samples, but the size was small. We do want to caution that contamination habits could change significantly. And so if we do pay as we throw, we could see more fly dumping. And anecdotally, we saw different types of contamination at different types of households. And so if we were at an affluent or a middle-class household, the contamination tended to be what we call wish cycling. So we would see a lot of plastics that were just clearly not on our recycling list. It's not a matter of, did they get it confused with the wrong yogurt container? It was broom handles, it was children's toys, it was, plastic stools, that kind of stuff. We did have some of that initial data with multifamily. That's where we did kind of see the trash and food contamination. And then bagged recycling was just a problem throughout. So what are households recycling? Definitely the Amazon effect or this delivery effect is there. By far, it was cardboard and paper. After that, we saw landfill, plastics, metal, glass, and we hardly saw any cartons. It was just something that was just almost not in the stream. So one of my questions to Lakeshore was, could we keep the same capacity toter and just put a box out there and people could put their recycling in a box? They don't love that messaging because they see a lot of problems with an empty box. That's where they do see people start to throw trash in an empty box. They really want that cardboard broken down, and people get kind of lazy and they'll just throw out, 8 boxes that are not broken down. So they really kind of cringe at that as a solution. So does contamination increase with increased recycling? If somebody's recycling more, are we also going to see increase contamination? Not really. We've got high recyclers that are very good at it, that have very low contamination. We've got some people that don't recycle much, but it's all plastic bags and they kind of have it wrong. And we see a lot in between. This just tells me we kind of have to market across the board. We have to educate across the board. These were some example samples that we pulled. And so here we've got scrap metal and construction debris that showed up in the recycling cart. We see a lot of paper towels. This particular cart, this is another messaging opportunity, didn't have the lid closed, so all the recycling was wet. And then this is what we're seeing in actually when the material got sorted. And I think this is interesting too. We just didn't see a lot of food containers. We're seeing a lot of plastic bottles, beverage containers. It's just, I don't know if that's because it's easy to recycle. I don't know if the messaging is more clear. But I think what's a little bit disheartening about that is people don't even really need to be drinking bottled water in the first place. And it's like one of the number one things that we're seeing in the recycling. So,
what do you mean by food? What do you mean by food containers? I mean like packaged food?
Yeah, we just didn't see, like, I was expecting more milk jugs and cereal boxes and pasta boxes and, pasta sauces. And I don't know what people are eating out there, but it's just not, we're not finding it. Now, again, that sample size is small. But we, it's not that small to not find any, Prego sauce in the, in the container. it was just interesting.
About
the glass is one thing, but I think a lot of the packaged foods, it's not always that clear if it's, it's like bleached paper or plastic covered paper and stuff like that. So the messaging wise, I mean, I don't know that anyone knows what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
What about takeaway food containers?
No, we didn't see, you can kind of see an example here of that. We didn't see too much of that showing up in the recycling at all. And I thought we would. Okay, so as we were going along, as we all talk here with confusing messaging, we definitely found some items where we had to reach out and we're like, hey, is this recyclable? And so, these were some of the plastics that we had questions on. All of this is recyclable. They don't really care if the straws end up there or not. They said they will recycle them. It's just the problem is they kind of fall through the cracks. And so,
can I just ask something about Lakeshore in these terms where, I mean, you keep talking about things that they prefer and, things that they'll reject and things like that. What does that mean in real terms as how that affects our overall recycling? They end up with contaminated recycling carts and does that end up costing more? Do they actually reject that stuff? What does that mean that they don't want this or they refuse to do it or they don't like it?
Yeah, I mean, I know sometimes they will call our refuse supervisor, if it's over a certain threshold, and then we have to work with that household. I would say at some point, if the load is too contaminated, they will reject it. And so, I think that 50%, if you've got a load of 50% trash or 50% non-recyclable, I would have to kind of say that would be not cost effective for them, or they might not be able to handle it.
You say load, you mean the tote at that particular address being 50% contaminated?
Yes, right.
Okay.
So if their driver, opens that lid and sees trash, and we do see this in the multifamilies where maybe one family went down and recycled well, and the next family had a party and there's, trash in it and so forth. Right. They will contact us to work with that person.
Okay. No, I thought when you said load, I thought you meant like the entire truck.
Well, it's possible. I mean, that would be a question I could reach out to Lakeshore for, but I think the general, I meant to mean it as a good way. I think there's been this myth out there, like, oh my gosh, if I throw away this, this one thing or these two items, like this whole load's going to be gone. And that's just really not the case. So if somebody's like, questioning and it's the wrong, little bit of plastic or something, that's still going to go through. Bagged recycling is a huge problem. They might not recycle it. If I'm just being frank of what they told me. And if there's a heavy contamination of trash, it might not get recycled. So tinfoil here, this was a learning one for me. They'll accept tinfoil with a little bit of food residue on it. That's not a problem. Mushroom containers. The tricky one that even we had a hard time working out with Lakeshore was trying to figure out whether a coffee cup had wax on it or not. And honestly, I wouldn't guess on these. And so, the messaging there lends itself to, okay, once this pandemic maybe winds down, can we message again where it's okay to bring reusable coffee cups to your favorite coffee shop and things like that. So there's just different ways to look at opportunities here.
I mean, I wonder if the messaging also needs to be to local Skokie coffee shops, to encourage them to, and I mean, like Dunkin' Donuts, like there's a picture of Dunkin' Donuts right there. Like, I mean, it's not just Skokie, right? So this is something like nationwide that their cups are either recyclable or not. And so, I mean, I don't know how much change we can take on, right? But like, I think that, working with coffee shops would be another way to go about this.
Yeah, and I know Josh has mentioned he's worked with some of the Starbucks in the city, but that doesn't just, it just doesn't change what people, if it's only the city and you're getting your coffee in Starbucks, that still gets confusing. You're right, it needs to be kind of a
nationwide or like regional, or I mean nationwide really, but yeah.
Dunkin' Donuts and sorry.
I was just saying you can do it, Liz. You can take on the nationwide coffee cup. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the plastic bags. You're not going to have issues with bags full of plastic bags being tossed in the recycling if people are using reusable bags again, which was an initiative we were going to do, and then COVID happened, and we can blame it on that.
There are a lot of initiatives by both Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, and other large coffee companies where they have made the commitments by 2025 to be 85 to 95% sustainable materials. It started with recyclable, but now they're looking into different options simply because some of these are not available right now, so they can make the commitment for something that doesn't exist.
If we really want to tackle this, a friend of mine is probably the biggest expert in the country on recycled cups and recyclable cups. So if you want to check them out. So,
well, I still think, once again, as we're talking about recycling stuff, we need to tie in reduction pretty closely to that.
Right. So these were some common items that we found. We see these as great educational opportunities to get out there. We saw a lot of toothbrushes and plastic flossers. Again, those coffee cups, a fair amount of clean paper towels and tissue paper. Those fibers are too short to recycle. Lakeshore does not want those in the recycling. Containers full of food, I would argue here people are just kind of being lazy. Like here's an example that we saw, and they just cleaned the pantry and they didn't dump any food out at all. That is something that would definitely contaminate a load. They don't want that. Plastic bags, we've talked about. Soft plastics, this was a great messaging. I think Jenny was there when they were talking about this. If you can smash it, trash it. And that's kind of their category. So if you grab onto this, piece of plastic and it's not easy to smash, it's probably recyclable.
So does that mean like the produce, like if you buy berries at Trader Joe's and they have it in one of those clam shells?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we're going to see some of those pictures on the refuse side, Lisa. I do think that is something that people don't understand, that those are recyclable.
Those are called thermoforms, and they're highly
They are recyclable because they're easily smashable, no?
Well, you can smash
a
cardboard box, but they're still recyclable. It means plastic bags like this bag you get from the dentist or something like that.
I've heard that if it can hold its shape, like if you can set it down on the counter and it can hold its shape by itself, then it is recyclable. If it sort of does not stand up by itself, then it is not recyclable. Do you think that would be accurate, Liz?
I think so. We do have a really cute video of Jenny's kids doing it. If you can
Yeah,
smash
so far that if you can
Oh.
smash it, trash it, standard, it has worked very well in our house because everything that has passed or doesn't pass the test really does seem to be recycled. It fits official guidelines, so I think it's a good marker. That's what the Lakeshore, I forgot her name, but she gave us that little jingle and it works.
Yeah, so just moving on, padded envelopes. I think they're getting a little bit better. Again, this is one of those things that was very confusing to people. If there's plastic and paper mixed together, that's not recyclable. But in general, I would say, these little like details of these minor things here, that's not the problem that's happening in our recycling stream. Not that we shouldn't market this, but we've got bigger fish to fry on some of this stuff. Styrofoam egg cartons, we saw vape pens, we saw things with a battery inside, and then we definitely need to get some information out on wish cycling. Once I learned about it, I saw it on Evanston's website. They have a little video about it. It's definitely something that we need to market. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I was just gonna say, because you were saying about the soft plastics thing, we also might want to specify certain things, because you were saying, first of all, as you rightly say, there's really no reason to be consuming all of that bottled water. I mean, there are reusable water bottles, you have filtered water at home, whatever it may be. But the water bottles also, I feel like, that doesn't mean that they're really environmentally better, obviously, but some of them are getting rather thin. So we don't want necessarily them to throw out all of the plastic single-use water bottles then, because they're kind of thin and smashable, right? I mean.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there probably are some challenges with that marketing campaign.
So yeah, I'm just saying we might want to be a little more specific, because I could see like people tossing things like that potentially. I mean, I don't think that's going too far off the limb.
That's a good point. Again, just wanted to touch base on the UIC's literature review. I thought some of their articles, I spent some more time looking at the abstracts, very thought-provoking. We're just cautious of taking recommendations that come, from another country where the culture and the economic system might be completely different. But certainly a great start to do a literature review and to get us thinking about new ways of doing things.
Liz, can you please mute? There's some feedback that's coming through, and it's really difficult to hear you.
It's from someone named Lori's.
Oh, Lori jumped on for later. Lori, can you mute your? Thank you. Okay. All right, so this section is we're going to look at the refuse set out and capacity study. It's essentially the same study that we did. It's just that we really upped the sample size here. I'd have to look. I don't think we quite made it to the 95 confidence interval. I think we did lose a little bit of data, but we got a lot of data points on this. From this, we probably pretty much doubled what we did for the recycling. We wanted to make sure this data was really good. Same thing, was the toter out, yes or no? What capacity was used? And kind of looking at the same things that we did with recycling. We're also finding that there's a percentage of stops that people are not utilizing. Again, this shows me that there's an opportunity to kind of optimize our program. So this was really interesting to me. I'm like, 13% of people did not put their carts out either time, but I talked to our data collectors and they said, if they flipped the lid and there was the equivalent of 1 jewel bag in there, they counted it as 0. And so we just have some really star people out there that are barely producing any garbage. We had 61% of the people utilized one of the two collections for the week, and 26% of people curb collected used both collections. Same type of graph here. So percent of refuse toter capacity over the course of two collections. Now, the only difference I'll say here is this was 1 week of data. So we looked at two collections within the same week. That just made more sense for our refuse system. So we had, a fair amount of people kind of in this 0 to 25%. The big takeaway here is 85% of households would have no capacity issues if we reduced to once a week. Even if we started that soon, most of the people just would have no issue. We kind of think that this yellow group here with a little bit of education on breaking things down and recycling more would also be okay. But we do have some households over on this far end here that are producing quite a bit of trash that it would be an issue for them. Does anybody have any questions on this?
For the people in yellow, were you finding boxes in their garbage?
We just think based on our contamination rates and so forth, I just really think that this group is so close to being at capacity that they would probably be okay, especially maybe if there's an increased cost to it or something like that. But when we get into this household is producing double the garbage, we're obviously going to have to find a solution for those homes.
Did you look at those orange and red households? Did you look into what was in their garbages?
We don't have that granular of data. We don't. Mm-mm. This is more based on kind of the, and you'll see this in the next couple of slides, what we're seeing in the refuse, Jenny. So there's definitely recyclables that are occurring in the refuse.
Did you also look at like the type of home or the size of the square footage of the home or anything like that, the way that you did for the recycling?
No, yeah, we did not. And we don't know how many people are living in each house. So there's a lot of, there's always more that you could do, but this is just kind of straight across the board. Again, randomized. We did not pick these locations, so it's a nice group of random locations. All right, so there's also some additional benefits, and this would be for both recycling and refuse. When we start thinking about greenhouse gases and reducing costs, I just attended a seminar. It was an engineering seminar, and there were maybe 35 municipalities represented there, and there was a significant group, I would say 5 or 6 of the municipalities were actively trying to get large trucks off of their streets, especially the residential streets. So typically that would be, refuse and recycling trucks are the ones that are driving down those. The reason being is it's the heavy trucks that do the damage to our streets. So how they figure this out is you want to kind of calculate out the point load of a wheel on the asphalt, and where that wheel hits, it's so heavy right where that wheel hits, it's going to create a hairline crack right there. What happens is water gets in there, you've got freeze and thaw, and that's kind of what starts to break down your street. They were very adamant that thousands of cars could travel down that street and not cause the damage of one garbage truck. So, when we start to think of, gosh, could we get another 3 to 5 years out of our streets? And what does that mean for cost savings to the village? And what does that mean for reducing emissions and also the maintenance costs for us to go and fill in potholes and do crack sealing and all of those other services? It becomes kind of a much bigger picture. Anybody have any questions on that?
Maybe you'll talk about this a little bit more, but I guess I'm just wondering what that would do to current staffing loads. Like I would feel really bad if people lost their jobs, just to put it quite bluntly, right? I'm sure you could probably, I don't want to say repurpose, but reassign
We have a lot of backlog tree work, Emily, that I'm not going to talk about right now, but we've got things for me to do. For sure.
Just kidding. Okay, yeah.
So, we got a little bit more efficient in our contamination polling. We were able to grab a few more people. When we got to December, we just had, it wasn't quite as busy with landscaping and so forth. So we were able to get a few more in this contamination study. For this one, we were looking at what are we finding in the refuse that shouldn't be in the refuse? And so there was different categories of plastic, paper, cardboard, metal, glass, textiles, kind of these items that are still in good shape, or, there's another option for Goodwill items, holiday lights, those types of things. We weren't able to figure out food with this. I will say, if an image of a cat hairball kind of comes to mind, of by the time, that garbage made it to us and it just turns into liquid, and that liquid kind of blends in with the other garbage. That is definitely something we need to do at our households, is figure out how much food waste is occurring. By the time it made it to us, we just weren't able to figure that out. Here's just a picture of us sorting and putting those into the bins. So again, some really positive news is most households have a relatively low amount of recyclables in their refuse. So what is the number there, like 0 to 14%. Most households are doing the right thing. Again, we've got some bad apples in the group that are, kind of bringing those rates up. This data does not account for the landfill, so this is only a snapshot of what we're finding in there that shouldn't be in there. Textiles, for example, now we only saw textiles occur in 3 households, but boy, did they have a lot of textiles, and those weights were heavy. And I would say that's probably pretty accurate of what, maybe what's happening out there. I was very surprised because we saw so much cardboard and paper in the recycling that we still saw mostly paper in the refuse. That really surprised me. This is just, if anybody wants to spend more time, kind of looking at the breakdown of what we saw. Here are some example samples, and I would say, we're finding aluminum cans and things like that in the garbage. And that to me is just kind of showing a lack of effort. I think everybody knows that, these aluminum cans are recyclable. So there is kind of an element of people just don't care. So here, just common items, we've got aluminum cans, water bottles, and so forth. That's what I think indicates a lack of effort. Tin foil with a little food residue, I don't think people know that that's okay. To Lisa's point, we saw a lot of berry containers and those types of clear clamshells. Textiles, yogurt containers was another one that we do need to get out there, letting people know that that's okay. Again, just my observation of what are people eating, because I'm not seeing some of this stuff show up in either place. Just because of the time of the year, we did see some holiday lights. The village has a program for those, so they don't need to end up into the trash. And then, what we saw is a lot of bathroom recycling. So I think people kind of need a nudge to get a recycling container on each floor of their house. So, we did see where people weren't bringing their shampoo and their Dove bottles down. Maybe they're really good at their kitchen recycling, but not so great at their bathroom recycling or their basement recycling. And so we did end up with good capacity type data for both of the households, for 114 households, that kind of show the correlation between what happens with recycling and landfill. We have this group down here that's not recycling, but they're also not producing very much trash, so that's okay. But then on the flip side, over on the far right, we see that people are recycling a lot, but they also kind of have maybe more landfill than normal too. This is just kind of a high consumer group that's buying a lot of stuff. But then interestingly enough, in the middle here, even as recycling increases, landfill remains kind of the same. So again, you have this wide range of like what's going on in our system. There's not a silver bullet going on here. Any questions on that? I wanted to just look at it in a different way to see if there's any correlation. If recycling weight goes up, does refuse weight go up? Not really. Again, just not really seeing that's a trend. All right, so concluding remarks. The set out rates could relate to habit and not need, but that certainly is a hurdle for people to get past, is the mentality portion. So if they're setting out their cart every week, they might think that they need that service every week. The 2 collection capacity is what we really looked at as what indicates need. The data indicates that further consideration could be given to reduce service frequency to once a week for refuse, especially. 85% of single family households already have enough toter capacity to transition to once a week. The small multifamily need further study. We would have to really figure a different solution out there. And then 61% of households have that toter capacity. I think I meant for recycling there. One caution that we want to say is that I think we feel most comfortable changing just one program at a time. And so, if we would change the refuse program, we would probably want to run this data again on the recycling end, just to see if habits are changing and people are recycling more. We certainly want to be careful with that. So educational opportunities, not to bag recycling, the importance of recycling, or a lot of the literature review is saying, if you hear it from a friend or a neighbor, you're more likely to do it. We want to be transparent about this data in the village, and we want to market wish cycling. All right, so curbside recycling, again, we're looking at, we probably wouldn't want to change that program first. Contamination was not different between the two at this time. That could change. There is not an inverse relationship between recycling and refuse necessarily. So if we see recycling rates go up, we don't necessarily see the refuse decrease. And what we want to really start with, and starting this summer, is I do have an intern in the budget. We want to do some boots on the ground messaging with cart tags and stickers, some how-to, some really kind of friendly messaging like, oops, we noticed that you did this, please don't do that anymore. And maybe even if we're flipping a lid and somebody's doing a good job, we give them like a good job sticker, something like that on their recycling cart. A whole bunch of people helped me on this project, UIC especially, and Lakeshore especially. We're just really good partners for this project. And that kind of concludes it. I know Max is going to talk about some of the fleet stuff in a little bit. Does anybody have any final questions after seeing the correlations or any of the final data?
Just to point out, I not just the no to bag recycling, but people want something good to happen to those bags, so it's steering them with some of the stuff into the right direction, just not just taking it out of the alley recycling.
Was that question, Michael? I wasn't quite.
Did that not come through?
No, I just don't understand.
Michael,
So
are you
the
suggesting
point
that
is,
people? Oh, are you suggesting
you can do bag recycling, right? I mean, you can bring it to Lowe's
Jewel.
or Walmart or Jewel. The point is, we don't want these bags shifting, or maybe even the village starts to take them. We don't want these bags shifting from recycling to refuse. We don't want them shifting the trash, we want them going to the right place. So that needs to be the message. Besides reducing, that needs to be the message with that stuff, and whatever else. You're talking about stuff like electronics and that type of stuff. Making those, because people will have a broken remote control or whatever, and nobody knows what in the world to do with this stuff. So, if it's not going to end up in the trash, where else can it end up? Batteries. Nobody knows what to do with batteries, all that type of stuff, which should go in the trash, I guess.
Yeah, coming up with bringing them a solution at the same time. Yeah.
I had a question. I guess my comment is that this seemed really valuable, and just wonder if we should consider funding a more extensive study on a fairly regular basis and set some standards or some baselines so that we can really, repeat the studies, so we get, really good continuous data, so we can, we make these assumptions, we can actually back them up with some additional data. So that'd be one question. The other one was, is it village policy, ever been village policy to consider finding people who don't put out the recycling bin, who don't ever recycle? Is that something that we want to avoid, or is that a policy that we want to discuss?
Well, Lakeshore did, Joy Rifkin, who Jenny met, she was wonderful. She had worked in New York previously. She did mention that New York has code that requires, especially businesses, to have to recycle, or, maybe a certain multifamily over a certain level. But she said in reality, it's really not enforced, but it does require that, there's a container there, and those types of things. So I think it would personally be I think we have a lot that we could do before we get to that point. And again, we talk about staffing and so forth, and just it not being we want it to be, I think, more of a positive program would be my take on it. But I don't know. I let the other commissioners weigh in.
Yeah, I think we are far from doing that, and it maybe discounts a lot of, most people don't have any excuse, but there might be some people who are not recycling because maybe they are a zero waste household and they don't have anything to recycle because everything is reused. So it's a lot more nuanced than just finding people for not recycling.
Yeah, I agree. We would really have to show that there's deliberate contamination and deliberate diverting to refuse.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. So one of the concerns I have about the recycling is, the amount of recycling that people do is not even all throughout the year. So even though you're showing households that might be, let's say, at about 80% capacity, 50% capacity, that may be true during some points of the year, but then other points during the year, their recycling is substantially more than that. So there may be some uneven. So I'm a little concerned about, reducing to once a week, because that's a big difference. That, that's assuming that there's that's basically 100% difference, or if reducing it by 50% means they have to make it up by quite a bit. So I'd like to give that some thought, although I like the idea of having fewer trucks around and having larger toters. So I think that's a good way to sort of remediate or balance that out. As far as the people who need a second toter, that would be an opportunity to charge, have a small fee for getting that second toter. If they want a second toter, it's $25-$30 or whatever. That
For refuse or for recycling?
For refuse.
Okay.
Yeah. So that way, then they have to make a choice. Do they want to spend the extra $25-$30 to have that second toter, or do they want to, think about how they, throw out their garbage? So, and that could also help to recoup some of the costs.
Thanks, Charlie. Anybody else?
Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know. Can you hear me? It's Olivia. Yeah. Okay. Is there a time frame for this? When you plan to implement, or are we at that point yet, or going to happen soon? Or?
I would say the point of today's meeting, the subcommittee has essentially a solid draft of their report for the listening session, and this was meant to partner with that to have a full picture of what our system is doing. And so, next steps for this would be the subcommittee would kind of, they'll get all the data from this, it's a lot to soak in, just in a presentation, take a look at the data, incorporate those into their, these into their recommendations of next steps. And then we're getting to the point, and again, this is something else on the agenda. I think I might just cover it right now. Our sustainability plan, we've chosen to go down the route of doing an RFP for a lot of reasons. I think it's going to be the most valuable for the village. We're very short-staffed on our end to be able to kind of write it ourselves or manage volunteers and so forth. But we found the greenhouse gas inventory to be extremely valuable. And I think the sustainability report it's going to turn out to be the same thing. And so we're looking to write that quickly. Once I get a better handle on budget, I'm going to go right into writing this RFP for the sustainability plan. I think that we can roll this refuse data. It's going to be on a similar timeline, so that report is incorporated into the sustainability plan. We're still going to provide an update report to the board on, our findings here. So once the subcommittee has some time to incorporate this into the report, that's going to be the direction we're headed. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And so, Libby, to answer your question, depending on what the subcommittee chooses to focus on, for example, the refuse collection, we could turn around and change that system pretty quickly. If the subcommittee is really interested in looking at recycling, that would be something that we would have to tie in more to that contract deadline. And if we're looking at food composting, I think even our contractor is going to have to work out some solutions for that. So most likely we're going to be looking at the year, like 2023 after that budget year, I would say, before any changes.
So I just have a follow-up suggestion, is that because this will appear to reduce employment for people, I think it would be helpful to include something about how they would be reallocated to other work, such as you mentioned the tree work. And I think that's really important because the trees are part of our environment, of course, and they have been neglected, I think, because of just we don't have the staff to do it. But if you could formulate that somehow in the messaging that there is other work for these people, they're not going to be reduced and out of a job or put to part-time.
Yeah, let me just jump in here, Libby. The village has had a long-standing policy for many, many, many years, going back to the 70s, I think it's fair to say, of a no layoff policy with respect to its employees. And so were we to make a transition in refuse services down to once a week, I think we would enter into that with some a cautious approach, let's say, because the volume of waste out there certainly initially is not going to change. The volume of waste is the volume of waste. And so we would, were we in a position to achieve reductions in optimizing that service level, we would certainly be approaching it on an attrition basis. So we would not be taking the approach of going in there and removing our employee assets. It would be through implementation of the system. We would make the assessments of what efficiencies that we could gain through that. And certainly one of the things that we would be entertaining if we were to make a change in the refuse collection frequency is what other opportunities we may be able to grasp along with that. For example, the concept we've talked about in the past is by reallocation of some of those employee resources and equipment resources, if there are those opportunities, could we apply those to different types of programs that relate to solid waste services? We've talked in the past about what opportunities there might be to take on some of the recycling services. Who knows, there might be some opportunities for us to do some things with other types of organics processing, for example. So we would certainly be looking to reallocate those resources to other programs. So that's the approach we would take.
Good, yeah.
There are other questions?
Yeah. Jim, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so first of all, this is really valuable info. I also want to thank everyone who worked on this. This gives us a lot of good information. But and this is not to minimize the work, but I'm also of the same mindset where this is a small data set. So I would caution that just based on the small amount of data, it was a lot of work, but it's still small data relative to the whole village. So I would just caution against drawing too many extrapolated conclusions from this about what we can do, like Charlie said. So yeah, I just want to make that comment. But thank you for everyone's efforts on this.
Sure. Understood.
Emily?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say thank you and say that this is, I am very, it was really cool to see the things that were added in, about the impact of trucks on pavement. And I feel like this is just a very thorough, even though the data set is small, I feel like the topics that were covered are quite thorough. And I wanted to say thanks for doing such a good job, a thorough job.
You should come back up here since you did all this. I feel like I'm taking your accolades.
Let's go ahead. Jim,
that was meant towards Liz, I will say.
Question, I saw your hand was raised. No.
I think that answers one. Okay.
Wait, just sorry, one last thought. Just to follow up on what Jim was saying about the data set being very small. It does sound though like you were working with Lakeshore, and I mean, I think that there's probably national trends for these kinds of things. And so I'm wondering if, despite the fact that it was a small data set, if it does sort of fall somewhat in line with, national trends. Not that, I mean, of course, Skokie could be unique, but it would certainly make sense, right? If this is something that I think that would help to complement the smaller data set is what I'm
saying. The data set and the recycling concerns me a little bit more, because that was kind of the one that we kind of learned on. We had that one situation where we lost some data because the truck got in front of the data collector. And when we lost, one part of that week, we lost the data for that total capacity. So, but with that said, when we were able to work with our own refuse department and we knew our routes better, and we really bumped up that number of samples, I wanted to make sure we had like at least a 90% confidence interval on that data. So it's certainly not bad. I would say the one caution I have on that is we maybe weren't geographically spread out through town. So, again, just with our manpower level, we picked certain areas. So we certainly have enough samples, but there of course could be something going on, in a small section of town somewhere with larger houses or, higher populations in those houses or, what have you. But also, Max and I were talking with the refuse system. Skokie's very unique with the second collection. So the data is supporting what we're seeing that other municipalities are doing with that. Any other questions, comments? All right, well, thank you for listening to that long presentation. All right, so the status of the waste committee, we kind of mentioned this before. This is how we plan to move forward. Is that committee will synthesize this part of the data, incorporate it into their recommendations, and then we're going to provide the board with an update. And then those recommendations are also going to go to whichever consultant that we hire for the plan. All right, that's all I have under that. For new business, just a real quick announcement, spring greening because of Easter and so forth, Palm Sunday, it's moved up much earlier to Sunday, April 3rd this year. We're going back to the old time from 10 to 2. It's going to stay at that Westfield Old Orchard location for those of you that were able to visit last year. We just heard a day or two ago that Chamber of Commerce was able to secure the office building to the north. It's kind of this green office building just to the north of that site. And what that means is we're going to be able to bring some of those vendors back, and it's going to look more like the old spring greening than the quick shredding and electronics events from last year. So keep an eye on the website as we are able to secure those vendors to come back. We're going to be able to have that information up on the Skokie Park District website. We're always looking for volunteers, so feel free to mark that on your calendar if you want to help out. Any questions on spring greening?
Yeah, 2 questions. What kind of volunteers, and are we going to have some type of presence there? Is the village going to have some type of presence there and environmentally?
Yeah, so there's not at this particular location any place for tables or information or anything like that. It would, in my opinion, be kind of a traffic hazard unless I'm looking at Max, but
You probably know the site layout better than I do
Yeah.
right now. So
there's definitely no parking. So, but certainly from just the perspective of the village is, part host for this event. So we're going to have a lot of village staff there. As far as volunteer work, we could have people helping direct traffic, and then we would be looking for runners to kind of, run recycling to the different booths, I guess, that they have.
By vendors, you mean
What do you mean by vendors? What kind of vendors are going to?
Yeah, so like Simple Recycling would be an example of who would be there on site. I know they do fire extinguishers and Lions glasses and yeah, that kind of stuff.
So you're just talking about places that'll be actually recycling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not the Endorsement.
Yeah, I was thinking older where there were actually different businesses and stuff like that. Okay. From like a few years ago, number of years ago.
Okay. All right. The sustainability plan update is kind of what I had already mentioned. I'll be writing that RFP soon. Everybody here will have a chance to look at that RFP and weigh in on that.
What is the, Liz, what is the timeline for that? So we're in January now, you're going to write up an RFP. When would we anticipate actually getting started on this process?
Yeah, so my goal is to essentially wrap that up so that it aligns with the new budget year of May 1st when we have funding for it to pay for it. So we'll be putting out the RFP. That it's going to take me a couple weeks to write it. It will take a couple weeks for it to be advertised. Then we're going to have to evaluate the proposals that come in. We'll have to go to the board. So sometimes that might take a couple of weeks, especially, if there's holidays or missed board meetings in there. And so we think that we're going to be able to have the consultants selected by, April and be ready to have them start on it with that May 1st timeline when they might need that first payment, which is when we'll have money for that.
Okay. Would there be interest in among the commission? We can talk about this later, but maybe initiating some process prior to that, maybe some sort of solicitation of some community input or some sort of structured conversations about this?
That's going to be also part of the RFP that we put out is to have a community input component to that. So that would be part of their process as well.
Is there going to be any conversation or addition or anything with the other districts in the village? So like the park district, the library, schools, any of that? I mean, I know it's easy to create a monster, so I don't want to.
We haven't thought of it to date, or we haven't contemplated that to date, but
Yeah.
certainly open to discussion, especially, I mean, we're very similar to the park district. We could certainly reach out, but I think some of the schools and entities might have their own, might have their own plan, but it's certainly something we can look into. I think it, the challenge there is it would slow the process down, but if that's worth it to include more people, we can certainly look into doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even entirely sure I'm advocating for it. Like, I think it's just, it's just something that I wonder about.
Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if it's too early to talk about it, since we're talking about sort of the RFP and sort of getting some firm involved and all of that only now. But yeah, I mean, I think, and I guess we have time to discuss that in a few minutes or whenever, more in depth. But I went to the Go Green Skokie Zoom meeting, and there were some ideas, I think, that some things that Charlie brought up too, and other people, as far as the form that it will take. So certain elements that we could incorporate into the new version of the sustainability plan that were not incorporated into that. So I assume we will also have the opportunity to discuss certain elements that we've seen elsewhere that we might like to see incorporated into the plan to ensure that they're part of it, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the work that everyone did in that plan, if you remember going back to fall, we still have that Google document too of the plans that people reviewed and which plans you liked and which elements, and that's, that's very valuable input. In fact, when we were reaching out to get quotes to just kind of even have a ballpark budget figure, I know the consultant found that data very, very valuable of what the commission liked and which plans, were out there.
We're also part of the Greenest Region Compact, and we're talking about the climate action plan for the Chicago region. That's certainly something we can review as a commission and take a look at, and that would help set the table, sort of establish a framework so that we can have a conversation, or we can all be talking about the same kind of thing and methodically review some of the things that might be incorporated into the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these goals are trending, similarly across the board. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I will say also, as sort of a follow-up to that, I want to interrupt, but I did also have, and I discussed this a little bit just via email, I think, following the meeting with Charlie shortly after the Go Green Skokie meeting. There was an idea or two that I had as far as implementation of the next version of the sustainability plan, some sort of suggestions for some tweaks or improvements that so I guess we have opportunity to discuss that and all.
Yeah, we are. I mean, we're not even talking about the plan yet.
It's like early days, but
yeah, we will certainly have opportunity for that. So keep your ideas.
Andrew, did you raise your hand again? Or no, was it still?
Oh, no, I just was turning it off now.
Any more questions on the plan and the process and the timeline, or is everybody good with that? Okay. I'm going to let Max talk about the village fleet update. he's really been working on this for a long time. This is even though the changes are kind of just starting to occur. I mean, he's been at the forefront of this for a long time. I'm just going to throw up the PowerPoint again. We have some photos. There you go.
Which way do I need to?
You just want to do this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello again. I don't want to keep everybody too long before we move on to other subjects, but just to let everybody know, so last Friday, a week ago Friday,
Maybe 2 weeks ago.
yeah, 2 weeks ago Friday. Liz had mentioned earlier, Joy Rifkin, who recently came to work for Lakeshore and had worked with Liz on the recycling study, and I think she's a great asset for Lakeshore, and it's been tremendously helpful for us. But one of the things in the context of doing that work with her, given her prior association with the city of New York, she had suggested that we should take a trip up to Madison, Wisconsin and check out their automotive maintenance facility and have a meeting up there with their fleet services director, who is also an alumnus from the city of New York's fleet maintenance operation. So we did that. So just to give you a very brief report on that, these are some of the photos that we took from their facility. It's a very new, opened, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, a LEED Gold facility. And these are just a few of the photos that we took up there, but a really impressive facility, quite an inspiring trip and presentation. In fact, they put together a PowerPoint presentation for us. And if any of you are interested in seeing that, I'd be happy to send it out to you. And in particular, maybe Chris Piccoli might be interested in seeing some of their information on the things they do with their fleet. So I'll send that out to you. But this just depicts some of the charging infrastructure that they have in place around their facility. They're making a huge push on biodiesel. One of the things that I was particularly interested to see was, although we didn't see it in the flesh, so to speak, but Madison, Wisconsin operates an electric fire truck made by Pierce Manufacturing, which is located in Wisconsin. And our fire department, for those of you that don't know, has been longtime operators of Pierce fire apparatus. And so they are a Pierce fleet, and Pierce is in Wisconsin, as I said. And so it is a proprietary unit for Pierce. And so the city of Madison operates the only Pierce electric fire truck that there is. But they are operating it. So one of the other interesting things that you see here on the photo on the lower left is a Soy Tire. And that is actually a police pursuit rated tire made by Goodyear that is made from soybean oil based rubber. So I'd never even heard of that, but we have heard of it now. And so it was a very interesting trip. Solar panels obviously power the facility all over the roof, and you see one of the solar powered car chargers there. One of the interesting things we saw there was
Go down a slide.
There's the facility from a distance there in the center. We can see some of the solar panels on the roof. To the right is a picture of a solar wall. It's the first time I'd ever heard of a solar wall, but they use that for air heating in the facility. And then on the left side is one of the I believe it's a fiber optic tube that provides lighting, downlighting in their hallways from their roof. So there's some really cool features up there. And so it was well worth our time, I think, to run up there and see what they're doing. Their police squad cars, they're running all of the hybrid Ford Interceptors, which we are getting ready to purchase our first hybrid Interceptor model. We will be running it, however, in the public works fleet, so we can sort of be the guinea pig for the police department and operating it. But we look forward to putting that in service in our police fleet soon, I hope. I will add, our police department is receptive to adding electric vehicles. They're a little bit hesitant based on the experiences of some local police departments here with respect to experience so far with the Ford hybrid Interceptor. And I will say that when Ford introduced that Interceptor model, there were some concerns with that first model year. And when in talking to the folks in Madison, they did acknowledge there probably were some first model year issues with that particular piece of equipment, but they've had good luck with it, which was the 2020 model year, but they've had good luck with it since then. So just to let you know, we had a great trip up there, learned some things, and that was the whole point of it. As also mentioned on the agenda item, charging stations, we are allocating money in this upcoming fiscal year budget for some additional charging station infrastructure, as well as attempting to get grant funding to support that through a ComEd grant program. Grant applications for that are due on March 25th. So we will be submitting for funding under that. The next picture that's up there, again, sort of relating back to the city of New York. New York's pretty progressive municipality in terms of what they do with their vehicle fleet. And in one of those areas is also in the Department of Sanitation in New York. This is a picture of one of their electric garbage trucks, which is a Mack truck. We met with a Mack representative yesterday to talk about their electric garbage truck offering. And so you may recall we have talked with the commission a few times in the past about our conversations with Battle Motor Corporation, who bought Crane Carrier Motor Corporation, which is who we typically buy garbage trucks from. And we've talked about potentially having a slot in an upcoming production run to buy one of their electric garbage trucks. This is a picture of a Mack garbage truck. So we met with Mack yesterday to talk about their electric product. So we are contemplating, the future possibilities of doing business with Mack for the same product. New York has bought, I believe now, is buying 8 more of those Mack units. They have some of those units in operation in their fleet. Sort of the real world that Mack has told us is that those vehicles can operate about 6 hours on a route before they need recharge. As we sort of would expect in a heavy truck like that, that's a challenging operating environment. It's a cold weather environment, which has an impact on how long the batteries can operate. Obviously, it's pulling a lot of weight, which has an impact on how long the battery can operate as well. But as you would expect, we see it on our cell phones and every other battery powered device. Battery technology is emerging and changing quite rapidly. And so it was a very promising meeting. The other thing I would add is that we are aware that there is a bill in the legislature in Illinois that would provide $200,000 in grant funding for purchasers of Class 7 and Class 8 electric vehicles, provided that if you're a purchaser of the electric vehicle, that you're scrapping a diesel vehicle when you purchase the electric vehicle. That bill was fairly recently introduced. It's been assigned to Rules Committee. I'm not sure if it will go anywhere or not, but we did pass that along to some of our contacts in Springfield today, so that they can monitor and hopefully exert some influence as appropriate to hopefully nudge that towards passage to see if that's something that can be of assistance to us, because that would certainly be helpful with either of those 2 potential vehicle acquisitions, because they certainly are expensive vehicles. Just as a point of reference, we're spending about $265,000 to $75,000 for your run-of-the-mill yellow garbage truck that you see running the streets in Skokie. And the going cost of that Mack unit, if you had to buy it, Mack leases it, so you don't have to buy it, but the cash cost of one of those trucks is about $600,000. So anyway, so just to let you know, we're continuing to pursue those opportunities. Can I answer any questions on that? Okay.
Hey, Max, this is Jim. I've been reading articles or seeing articles about fuel cell powered garbage trucks. So it's an alternative to a battery powered. So I don't know if that's something that the village has looked into, but yeah, apparently there are alternatives to the battery powered, including fuel cell.
Yeah, no, I have not seen much about fuel cell powered yet. So if you see anything in that regard, please send it along to me.
Sure. Yeah, I guess there are some significant advantages, but yeah, I'll send what I've come across.
Great.
If you want, I'll send you also this article. They just actually did the Dakar rally with a fuel cell vehicle and stuff. It was actually pretty interesting. So it was with a French company and stuff, but that's another alternative. And
okay, super. Next meeting schedule.
Yeah. Are no more questions? Next up, if nobody has any more questions on for Max, Our next meeting is, we have a conflict with the village board meeting. We're slated for the 22nd of February, which is a Tuesday, but that Monday is President's Day, so the village, the board is meeting on Tuesday instead. So our option is either to meet on Wednesday the 23rd or to push back 1 week to Tuesday the 1st of March. So rather than, I guess if everyone could just email Liz if you have which one you can do, if you have a preference, then we'll just, whichever has the most votes, I guess. Liz, does that sound okay? And then we talked about this and I forgot if we concluded what we would do.
I've got doodle poll. I can send out a doodle poll.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's even fancier, better. Okay. Sounds good. Okay, next on our agenda, we have other business. I'm sure all of you saw the public comments that we received over the last few days from Liz. It's certainly rare that we receive any public comments directed specifically at SEAC. Although the public comments, if you had a chance to read them, were all directed to SEAC, although as you'll note, the item is not on our actual agenda because it's not something that we were, consulted about, tasked with, anything. What the public comments were all about was the Carvana Tower that is proposed.
Car vending machine tower.
I'm sorry?
It's a car vending machine.
Correct. Carvana is the company's name. Basically, it's a 13-story car vending machine. I mean, there are various ways to classify it. A giant 13-story billboard. But there's obviously a lot of public interest in this. We weren't asked for our opinion. It doesn't mean we don't have opinions, but we're not, the way village ordinance is written, we're not a part of that formal process. So when the plan commission makes decisions, although there are sustainability implications, the way that the comprehensive plan is currently written, there's no role for SEAC. So I'm sure, I know I've had conversations with some of you who wanted to just talk about this. So I don't know if Max, if you standing up there, if you wanted to say something first, or if you're just standing there to receive.
Yeah, if you'd like me to comment on it, I mean, you and I, we spoke yesterday and earlier today, and as you said, we have received a number of public comments with respect to the Carvana matter. I did speak with Matt Brandmeier and John Lockerbie, yesterday and earlier today with respect to the Carvana status of the Carvana proceeding. And we do expect that the Carvana matter will go to the village board at the February 7th meeting. With respect to that, I know that the village has been meeting with representatives of Carvana, and so the status of those discussions at this point is that Carvana is now proposing to install 2x4 horizon markers between 60 and 65 feet on all four sides of the building. And my understanding is when the Carvana matter went through the plan commission, I believe the height that it was committed to at that point was 54 feet or 54 feet, 10 inches. So that they have agreed to extend that height higher up the building on all four sides. Matt had noted to me that they're measuring the exact height to match up with the height of the deck, of one of the deck heights of the building. Instead of referring to it as stories, they're referring to it as decks. And this particular structure has a ground floor plus 13 decks on it. This is higher than the nearby treetops and higher than, as I said, the proposed height at which they had during the plan commission process. And Carvana is also proposing to turn off the lights on 3 sides of the 4-sided structure, which would exclude the east facade from 1 a.m. until daylight during the spring and the fall migratory seasons. I offered you little expertise with respect to all of this. I didn't start learning about any of this until yesterday. So, but this follows the standard recommended by the Chicago Audubon Society in terms of the lights out after 11 p.m. during migration program in Chicago. So within the context of that program, that's a program that during the 3-month spring migration program and the 3-month fall migration period, it's a program to have tall buildings in the city turn out their lights or reduce lighting. So the restrictions that I referenced would be the appropriate restrictions for a tall building in the city that is 20 stories high or lower. So those restrictions from 1 a.m. through daylight hours would be consistent with that. And so again, what Matt has said is that Carvana is proposing to do that for 3 sides of the 4-sided structure. The treatment, the horizon treatment, as he has characterized it, he did send me a reference materials from the city of Portland that he offered as an example, which was from the city of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, an administrative rule with respect to bird safe windows that is followed in the city of Portland, which seems to suggest that the most critical zone for applying these sorts of window treatments, similar to what Carvana is proposing to install on this structure, is that building elevation from 0 to 60 feet. The 4x2 spacing that's referred to for that window treatment does appear to be consistent with what is described in this Portland reference material. That's about all I can tell you. As I said, this is only things that I've learned literally in the last day or so. So whether this standard really represents the sort of the be all and end all to all the standards that are out there, I can't tell you, but that is what I can tell you, and what Matt and John have shared with me as to where things stand with respect to the Carvana issue.
I want to interrupt, but yeah, I mean, it's good that they are seemingly, I think that this sort of conversation is ongoing at least, and they're not absolutely set on doing, I guess, what would be considered the bare minimum. But I mean, I still have serious reservations, and certainly not that it's down to me, obviously, but I personally would have some serious reservations in terms of, I don't particularly think that even though Carvana clearly seems to have thought it's an ideal location, I don't think that site is really suited to this kind of structure. I mean, it's really, you're right up against a nature preserve where it's obviously going to have a even increased impact on the surrounding wildlife. It's right by a residential structure, which I feel like could be setting a bad precedent for these kinds of things to be built, next to a residential structure. I don't feel is entirely the best idea either, but that's a little bit of a different thing. I don't wanna get off into the weeds, but that would be one of my other things. And obviously then you have, there's like the Holocaust Museum and stuff like that. So I feel like for that reason too, it's kind of a sort of an odd choice to locate that kind of structure adjacent to the Holocaust Museum. I would think that with something like that, you would want to have more of a environment that's conducive to reflection and introspection, perhaps, and an environment that's a little bit more peaceful and more quiet. And
Andrew, you mind if I interject real quick? It's like because the design is pretty much going to be a billboard. When you come on the highway, you're going to see it right in front of you, this big blue tower. I mean, that's the reason why they're putting it there.
Yeah, I mean, I understand their perspective, why they want it there. Obviously, they want it there because it's high visibility for them. That doesn't necessarily mean, from my perspective, that I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can about it. That doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's the right thing for the community and for the surrounding properties, and given that the nature preserve is there. I don't know how anyone else feels about it, but I mean, I'm glad that there are concessions that have been made and that continue to be made, and hopefully, if it is going to be built, it's going to be constructed sort of in accordance with the best practices in terms of birds and such, respecting wildlife. But I mean, I think I would be kind of fudging the truth in terms of my actual feelings if I said that even with the concessions that are being made, that I'm thrilled with it being there.
I agree with everything Andrew said, but also, Max, you mentioned that it follows the Audubon recommendations, but we got a letter, and the way that they were given to us, I can't pull it up without like looking at every single letter, from Judy Pollock, who's president of the Chicago Audubon Society, and they have some concerns. So I'm wondering, Max, where you got that information from, and then maybe if someone could pull up the Audubon Society letter, and because and we could, I just, how do we, when you say, Max, that it fulfills what's required of the Audubon Society, but then on the other side of that, I mean, how do we know that? Because I'm confused, because one of the letters was actually from the president of the Audubon Society. So I'm confused, and I don't know enough about bird migration to know the Audubon Society versus the president, who says she represents the Audubon Society, and what the differences are there.
Yeah, nor do I, Lisa. So all I can tell you is I'm reading to you the attachment that Matt sent to me this afternoon, which comes from the Chicago Audubon Society's webpage. So you and I will both, I guess, not know the exact nature of our sources. So all I can tell you is no more than that. I'm just reading off their webpage that was sent to me, the header of which was, quote, "Lights out after 11 p.m. during migration." And
I think there's a question of like minimum, like there's like existing buildings and minimum sort of actions to contribute to this when you have existing buildings. So like, if you like in a place like downtown Chicago, where there are a ton of really tall buildings that have a lot of glass, like if you can get all of these buildings to come together, and especially in areas which are office buildings and not residential, where like you don't need, on average, you don't need this after 11 p.m., then this is something that will like probably address, and I'm just guessing, but it'll probably address something like 40% of like, birds like flying into these buildings during those hours. If like you can, and it's like a tangible thing to ask these buildings, okay, can you dim your lights, between 11 and 6, and can we reduce the impacts by like whatever X percentage? And so that's likely where that's coming from, right? And it's not, I think that like it's a different ask than a new development, which has the choice to like, which has the opportunity to make different choices up front, versus like existing buildings that, we are sort of like retrofitting those existing buildings in order to like, best practices moving forward, without demolishing them, basically, right?
Those existing buildings have purposes to being tall buildings that are in and of themselves purposes. Each floor has offices on it. Having a tower that just holds cars is really just a giant billboard. You can still sell used cars from a single story lot or a 2-story lot.
And
Most used car lots do that.
yeah, I was gonna say, actually, I stumbled upon an article. I don't pretend to know, not being in that area, I don't pretend to know the entire story there, but I think it was in the Denver metro area. They actually had a debate about how this thing should be zoned, because some of the people were saying essentially that this is a giant billboard, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's why they're not dimming the lights on the east side, because the east side is where the highway is. Charlie, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of problems with the Carvana proposal, and I'm flabbergasted almost that it's come up and that it's gotten as far as it has. I mean, but from a sustainability perspective, I think this shows, like the Amazon thing, how flat-footed we are, both as a commission and as a village. The fact that this proposal could come in, and here we are, a major resource, the Harms Flatwoods Preserve, and 2 high-value developments in that area, the Holocaust Museum and Optima. And we're looking at a car vending machine on that site. And we're completely unprepared to really even have an informed discussion about it. To me, is a pretty significant problem, aside from whatever our feelings are about the appropriateness or the, whether we would support Carvana or not. And that's why I think we need to be a little more proactive with the sustainability planning process. We do have an instrument and a tool that we can use. The Chicago, Climate Action Plan and the Greenest Region Compact has tool framework is a very useful tool to at least begin thinking about it. And I would suggest I would like for people to sort of take a look at that, and really, so we can get ahead of this and start evaluating these things. I would also say that Skokie's comprehensive plan, which is frequently cited as rationalizing some of the approvals of these developments, was adopted in 2003, which means it's using data from the last century, and the world has changed a lot in that time. And I think we're well past due to having a more up-to-date view and vision of what we can do in the Skokie and what the optimal path forward. And given the current climate conditions and the environmental situation globally as well as locally, that we make a more concerted effort to consider environmental concerns. And as this case points out, I think where Skokie is and its relationship to the urban ecology, the local ecology of this area. So I think we have a lot of work cut out for us. But I mean, the Carvana thing, I mean, it's just a great big billboard. I don't think when I think of the value proposition of that area, I can't think of, I mean, it's like, I can't think, it doesn't add value to that area whatsoever. And it just strikes me as just it's astonishing, I guess, is the way I would put it. So thank you.
And to your point, I was just going to say, one of the people who wrote in actually said, commenting on this, said that they're, I believe, a retired real estate developer. And they said also that they don't feel that this is sort of the best and highest use, sort of, I think, for the parcel, essentially. And I have to agree. I mean, I don't think that, putting, like I said, putting what's essentially a huge glass car display case billboard adjacent to a forest preserve, adjacent to a residential structure near the Holocaust Museum. The siting is a bad thing given the surrounding properties, the character of the neighborhood. I mean, obviously, I think there are legitimate concerns that will be substantially altered by the addition of this structure. So, I mean, if it were up to me, I have to say that right now, knowing what I know, like, it would be a no-go.
Just as a, to interject, we do have a in-person public comment here. So there's a couple who have their hands raised who haven't gone, and then after that, we're gonna have our public comment go. So Chris, if you wanna.
Yeah, so I completely agree with what Charlie was saying and just how this whole process has been. I've actually had some residents speak with me too about that, and they've been concerned and voiced their displeasure of how this has all been handled, especially for the site and all that and things. I want to interject a few things too, is that I'm not a fan of the Carvana stuff too, just because they use blue lighting, the way how it diffuses and everything, it looks terrible with your eyes. So when you're driving on the highway, it's the last thing I'd like to have interfering is with vision, especially right there around a curve where people crash enough as it is for some reason, but they do that. And like the question also would be is what do we do with the site, heaven forbid, if Carvana folded or something, you know, what usable is this building in the future or whatnot? So there's a lot of questions that this just seems like a very, you know, up and go kind of thing, and not much longevity thought behind it and stuff. And I'm not a big fan of it too, because I go to those forest preserves in that field and all that other things. I mean, we took away spots, I think, from making parking the way that they did it there. And just, yeah, I'm not a fan of just how this has all been, and the blue lighting is awful. So that's my interjection.
Emily?
Yeah, I actually, you know, to piggyback on one of the things that Chris said, once this goes up, it is up, and it is sort of permanently up. It is like not very common that things get demolished. And this could be repurposed in an area where, you know, if this were built in an area where it was more likely to be repurposed, then I think that would be a better fit for it. So I think that's sort of one concern I have. Another concern, you know, Max, you were saying that Carvana has agreed to do this during migratory season. And I think we need to hold them to a much higher standard. I mean, like, that's just, I mean, if that's all they're willing to give is like, oh, we'll do it during migratory season because that's the most important thing. Like, no, you should just do it year round. Like, if it doesn't matter during those like few months, then it should not matter, you know, the rest of the year. I mean, that like, it's kind of like appalling to me actually that that this has gotten this far, going on what Charlie said. And then, you know, my last concern is that I think that like we are now in a stage where we need to make decisions that impact, like where we look at the health of the entire community instead of just allowing like this business to essentially make money off of the backs of the well-being of this community. And there is a place for that, like absolutely, you know, I'm sure that there are areas in Skokie where this tower could be much more successful. It's like, I don't think that it needs to be as tall as it is, like you know, but that's just my own personal thought on that. But you know, if it's going to have this much of a significant impact, negative impact on the community, then allowing a business to come in and make money off of like our well-being is, that's just not appropriate. Like for 2022, that just seems grossly inappropriate. That's all.
Thanks. Lori, if you want to briefly just introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes for a public comment. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Lori Kaplan. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm a Skokie resident, retired village employee. I spent 17 years working as an animal control officer for the village of Skokie, and I have picked up more dead birds than I care to remember.
I recognize you.
Yeah, it's heartening to hear you all speak so vehemently and logically about the inappropriateness of this structure at this location. Just a couple of things to add that I love the thing about the highway. I hadn't even thought about that. Sure, let's blind drivers coming around. It's a great idea. But another thing that is unique about this tower is it is a glass box. All 5 sides, not counting the floor, are glass. Birds coming from any direction will look right through it. Any direction, any height. So agreed, if this monstrosity must be built, it should be built with extraordinary bird mitigation. The American Bird Conservancy, in one of their letters, which I hope you got a copy of that one also, says that it should have 100% coverage of the highest degree of bird-friendly glass. And even that doesn't address all of the other issues. But yeah, Carvana is trying to get away with the least amount that they could do and a structure that is just inappropriate altogether. I think I don't really have anything else to add to that other than, yeah, birds die every day of the week, not just during spring and fall migrations. Again, I picked up enough of them to know. So thank you very much for your passion on this, and I hope that together the people of Skokie can get the message through to the Board of Trustees. This is a bad idea, just please, no. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thanks. Jim?
Yeah, thanks. While the comments say it may all be valid and totally logical and reasonable, my question is, what is our actual scope? What is our responsibility and authority as a commission here?
Very little.
Because the public comments all seem to say, the commission should reject this, but do we have any authority to reject anything?
Well, I think a lot of the time, a lot of the emails also seem to suggest not that we should be rejecting it ourselves, but essentially I think that we are an advisory commission. So I think that it is that we should advise the village mayor and board of trustees to reject the project. I think that's what it was saying. And I guess, as granted that we're not part of we were not involved in the whole conversation from the beginning. Obviously, that's something that I think we should make clear, that we were not included in this. So it's not like we, obviously now we've been brought into it. But I would argue, as an advisory commission, we certainly do have the opportunity to make our position as individuals and also as a commission clear. If there's a project like this that bothers us because of the environmental impact that it might have, I would argue that we certainly could say something. I don't know what you think, Jenny, but.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times in the past where we have on our own said that this is what the commission feels about a certain issue. We wanted to make our position known. This goes to the long-standing issues we've had with that language, is that how we're advising the trustees and the mayor, but are we advising them when we want to advise them, or only when they solicit our advice? We've clearly not been solicited for our advice, so they're not looking for anything formal or informal. Obviously, as residents of Skokie, we have the ability to assert our opinions. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, as a commission, say that this is what the commission feels. This is, even without having any kind of vote or putting something in writing, this is all out there for everybody to see. There's clearly a consensus here amongst us. But I don't know if Max, you want to.
I mean, even if there's a consensus, I still would feel uncomfortable as a commission going to the village, which has been looking at this for a long time, which has sent it to another commission multiple times to look at certain issues with it. And based on our, 15 minutes of discussion, and I mean, we could certainly present the emails that we've gotten to them, but this is something that we're coming in at the last minute and we're saying, hey, yeah, most of us are against it for a whole lot of reasons, some of which are environmental. Maybe we should have been consulted at an appropriate time when it got sent back to the Planning Commission, for example, and they said, well, we need to figure out what to do about the birds. So we need to look at the Audubon recommendations. We need to look at what other villages are doing. But we're kind of stepping in here at the last minute. I'd be hesitant to come, with anything other than as individuals, or else saying maybe we need to look at this further.
Well, I think what we're doing is highlighting some of the issues that have been touched on, but maybe not adequately, or even some issues that are not really even being addressed or responded to. I mean, the fact that they would leave the lights on at all, that's just birds aside, that's such a waste of
Yeah, right.
energy and electricity. I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't do that at home. Why should you do it? That's such a gross
but
waste of
they are
resources.
being addressed and responded to. This stuff got sent back to the Plan Commission, and Carvana said, well, we'll do this, this, and this. And we may not feel like that's enough, for reasons that we're raising here. But I just, I would think that if we were to do anything, it would be to go and say, hey, whoa, this is all happening. There's a lot of environmental concerns. We need to look at this. We need to be involved and not just make a decision. I mean, it sounds like a lot of us are against it.
I mean,
but we don't really know.
Decision, and we don't have that authority anyways.
We have two commissioners here right now. Can we hear if they want to hear from us, or what they're thinking, or is this a done deal?
Trustees. We have two trustees. Yeah.
Yeah, two trustees. Sorry, we're all commissioners, but we have two trustees. Thank you. Yeah, can we hear from the two trustees that are here, if you don't mind?
I mean, we're here right now hearing your comments and your feedback, so we're taking that in. We still have yet to receive the report from the Planning Commission, so that is something we're still waiting upon as well to see what the final report looks like. And so these are all things that we are taking into consideration as we continue to receive public feedback on the issue.
And as Max stated, the issue is changing daily with concessions and adjustments. So as Kim said, it would not be proper for us to speak on this because we don't have all the information.
Do you all have access to the letters that we got?
Oh yeah, we've got them all.
We've been getting them, yes.
But you got
So then
I'm sure you're getting letters, but our letters, the letters that came to us.
Yes.
What are we? We're over 400, 500.
So that makes sense, but I guess I'm wondering, obviously, I understand that this is very fluid and that it's very dynamic, it's changing constantly. But I think one question that I have for the two trustees is, whether there would be an impact if if this commission were to write a formal letter, even if it is, not within the process of, not currently in the process of, your process. I'm sorry, it's not eloquent, but would that be something that you would consider? Like, would that impact your review of this application in any direction, if we were to do that? Or is it not is it not according to the process, and so you would just disregard it?
People from all over are weighing in on this. So if the commission weighed in, I see nothing wrong with it. Kim?
Yeah, I think there's a separate conversation in terms of the role of SEAC in this entire process, and that's an ongoing conversation. But as far as right now, if the commission were to go ahead and submit a comment as a commission, then that's up to the commission to decide, and that will be received by the board as well as part of that consideration.
I didn't want to interrupt, but yeah, I was going to just say I got my point about I don't want to sort of step on another commission's toes or anything. On the one hand, I understand the sort of hesitancy, but on the other hand, then I also I feel like there is this sort of environmental and moral imperative, I think, at least that's how I feel, to weigh in. And that's why I certainly wrote in and made my feelings known. But I certainly think that if we would want to, I don't know, like our ability to draft like a memorandum. I was discussing this with, I think, with Charlie as well. You know, the way I personally view it would be entirely appropriate.
Charlie?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Michael was saying about the, coming into this conversation somewhat late. I think to me, that's exactly what the issue is, that we are so ill prepared to have this conversation. And not only as a commission, but I think the village was really ill prepared. And to me, that's the larger issue. The Carvana is obviously an obviously controversial proposal, but and is going to generate a response by the very nature of it. But there could be other proposals, development proposals that come in that may not be as, generate one side or another, that there may be a more divided kind of conversation about it. And yet we don't really have a framework for effectively evaluating or having some sort of constructive discourse about the environmental or sustainability implications of it. And that to me is a real deficiency that I'd like to see us work on as a commission. And I'd like to see the village address as a priority as well.
Jim?
Yeah, no, I get that there's a lot of passion in this. I'll just say that, like Mike said, we haven't been involved in the conversation, so I feel severely uninformed on the topic. We haven't gotten a chance to hear, all sides, get all the data that we need. So yeah, I just feel pretty uninformed on this topic because it hasn't been part of our commission discussions.
And to echo Charlie, when I'm looking at this article here about the village kicking the matter back to the commission in December to address 4 issues: building and sign lighting, truck routes, delivery hours, and bird strike prevention. And maybe that was the point where, we could have and perhaps should have been brought in for one particular issue of the 4 that they're looking at.
Oh, Emily? See a hand up.
Yeah, I think I agree that we should have a broader and more long-term discussion, not long-term, but a broader discussion about our ability to, weigh in on environmental and sustainability issues when, with developments and redevelopments and things that go before the village board, so that we can be prepared and that so we can, provide informed statements. I think in the meantime, from where I'm sitting, I don't see any harm in this commission considering, drafting a formal statement to submit to the board of trustees, and just opining on this. I mean, I understand that, there are some people on this commission who feel uninformed, and I obviously, this would be something we would vote on, but I guess I would submit a motion for us to draft a formal statement to submit to the trustees.
A formal statement that says what?
That says that there are significant environmental concerns, and that there are significant concerns from an environment point of view, from a sustainability point of view, and also from an impact to the community. And I think that when we consider environmental concerns, we're really considering people's well-being, the well-being of the, and the health of the individuals who live in this community. And I think that there are a number of things, there are a number of issues that have been raised. And I wonder if this building might not be like better suited in a different part of the village.
I second that motion.
I would be all for it.
I would be remiss in not cautioning the commission that this is not an agenda item. And
oh, thank you.
Yeah, we cannot vote on something that's not on the agenda.
That we don't notice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thanks for reminding us. Sorry. So what would be our path forward then, Max? If this is something we wanted to pursue?
That's a great question.
Well, I would suggest, and I don't think it's inappropriate, and since, you know, this has been an open conversation, but that we write that people can make comments as individuals, but citing that they are members of the Sustainability Commission and include their concerns about our concerns about not being effectively involved, so that we could have some input into the conversation. But yeah, I would encourage people to write individual comments, but also cite that as a member of the Sustainability Commission, this is, you know, and express the concerns that you would have from your perspective on that.
I did, I will say, I did comment following the initial proposal, and I did send in a comment following, hearing about the concessions that were made. So I did kind of, as an individual, certainly voice my concerns as far as the environmental impact and location, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly appropriate. I mean, I know for sure it has been done in other instances and in other matters.
Yeah, I mean, given that it is likely to be at the next board meeting, we would not have time to do anything at our next meeting. So that's seemingly our best option.
Isn't there a potential that the trustees would not necessarily vote, even though it is up for a vote? Isn't sometimes things are delayed? And so if we do have an opportunity to do this, because if there's another month added, would we just have to put it on the agenda for next month, or do we have to vote to put it on the, I mean, can we make sure it's on the agenda for next month? And if it's moot, it's moot?
Possible, sure. Yes. I mean, it's slated, I think is the correct term, to go to the board on February 7th. But to your comment, Lisa, I mean, things, you know, particularly with development petitions, things do change from time to time for any number of reasons, and the matter might not be heard. So yes, if it were not heard prior to this commission's next meeting, and the commission were to be of the mind to put it on the agenda, we could certainly do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think that given the time, I think, and that's where we go from here on that. But you know, we've all kind of made our opinions heard here also. The next item on our agenda is a motion to adjourn, if there is one. Rick, and a second by Emily. Okay, and Charlie is a third. All right. We are adjourned. Good night.
Right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.